Hi there. We're now live with Prohibition Partners and delighted to be here. I'm Dylan Kennett from DLA Piper, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Marcus Studdard, who is the head of AIM and UK Primary Markets Group at the London Stock Exchange. Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Dylan. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I guess we can crack right on. Do you want to give us a bit of information on yourself, a bit of introduction and your role within the LSE?
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcus Studdard. I'm the head of AIM and UK Primary Markets at the London Stock Exchange. So essentially, my team and I spend a lot of time talking to pipeline companies and investors, as well, of course, as the existing companies on AIM in the main market, to make sure that we provide markets that companies can raise capital on and investors want to invest in.
Brilliant, thanks. And just a bit of background on myself. As I said, I'm at DLA Piper. I'm a senior associate in our corporate team there, with particular focus on cannabis companies, and I head up our global cannabis practice. We're now operational about 20 jurisdictions, so we're probably one of the largest cannabis offerings for People's Choice and law firms. So we've been seeing a lot of companies go through all the corporate life cycle at the moment, and ultimately the big question here we're here to deal today is how these companies go public in the UK. So Marcus, it's probably a good place to start. It would be helpful to give people a bit of background on the differentiation between perhaps the AIM and the main market at the LSE, and the distinctions between both.
Yeah, sure. So conscious of time, I'll just do a quick run through, but I think it is a really important point. As a market operator, London Stock Exchange, I think it's quite different to many others around the world. Many other exchanges essentially operate one main market, and then they're segmented in different ways. 25 years ago, we made a different decision, and that was that we would operate AIM very separately to the main market. So, for example, a company that comes to AIM doesn't need, in most cases, to do a fully vetted prospectus that's vetted by the FCA. The company is subject to the AIM rules, and they are operated and maintained by the London Stock Exchange. So essentially, AIM is a growth market for companies. We have just short of 850 companies on the market, with market valuations anywhere from 10 million up to £3 or £4 billion, and those larger companies are companies that have grown successfully on AIM. I think one of the key differentiators between AIM and the main market is the rules are less prescriptive, and they are less prescriptive because we operate the system of nominated advisors, and they are essentially investment banks that are licensed by the London Stock Exchange to carry out the role of preparing a company for AIM and then also supporting that company once it's admitted to the market. And that's really important because it's made the admission process, I guess, less prescriptive and often more streamlined than going to the main market. But it also means that those nominated advisors have an important regulatory role. And so rather than having very prescriptive eligibility criteria around things like track record, size, free floats, corporate governance, what the nominated advisor does is they work with the company and they form an overall view of whether the company is appropriateness. And I think for this sector, that's a particularly important point because they will obviously be taking into account the broader sector and kind of legal requirements when they're thinking about whether a company in this sector who's thinking about coming to AIM is appropriate.
Oh, thanks. That's super interesting, and I think for a lot of people who are dealing with cannabis companies, it's all brand new to them, especially if they've been taking a lot of private money over time. So kind of demystifying the public markets is quite important in this instance. So thanks for that. I guess the big topic of the year for us, and probably one that I can give a bit of overground on, was around the recent FCA guidance that was received about taking companies public. And in the cannabis sector. I guess to the uninitiated or for our overseas viewers, since the legalization of cannabis in the UK in 2018 for medicinal purposes, a lot of questions have been brought to at least us on the legal side, and I'm sure to Marcus as well, about whether they could raise capital on the public markets. What we've really grappled with as an industry is, and a lot of brain power and legal fees have probably been exerted in this topic, is around how the Proceeds of Crime Act, or POCA for short, applies to the public markets. And again, for those who are not UK based or well versed in this, POCA is a piece of UK legislation that perhaps is the government's main tool to recover proceeds from crime, and is used principally as a means to combat kind of criminal activity such as money laundering, financing, etc. And it's a means to claw back assets, properties derived from, let's say, nefarious activities. It also is quite interesting in the UK because this piece of legislation has extraterritorial effect, i.e. it also catches overseas activities in its ambit. But unfortunately for the cannabis industry, what this meant was when we started acting for a lot of investors and companies looking to invest in overseas markets, we quickly realized that this piece of legislation was likely to trip up those activities because the supply of cannabis for recreational purposes brought something like a 14-year penalty here in the UK. And then any funds which were derived from that investment, i.e. dividends, might constitute criminal property here in the UK, and then engaging the POCA legislation. So it was quite a bit of a confusing situation to be put in, and perhaps it might have had a bit of a chilling effect as to people didn't know whether companies would be able to list in the UK and whether investors could participate in those types of listings. But what happened in September of this year, which we were quite pleased about, is the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority here in the UK, came out with some guidance as to how we might list, or what a listing might look like in the UK for a cannabis-based business. But I'll just go through quickly, and apologies for the soliloquy, Marcus, but the FCA had the view that recreational cannabis businesses listing in the UK, that would be verboten, that those type of businesses weren't the type that would be able to list, and POCA would be engaged. So that was quite clear. We were pleased to see some certainty coming from the FCA there. But what we were also pleased to see was the FCA guidance suggested that domestic cannabis companies in the medicinal space should be allowed to list, provided they're operating under a home office license. And that's what we expected. I think that's probably the right decision, and it's great news for UK domestic companies focusing on pharma, R&D, medicinal, etc. What was interesting was kind of the third limb around overseas medicinal cannabis companies, in that they were probably eligible, but we did not have specific guidance just yet as to what they would need to show in terms of, say, medicinal equivalents, that they were operating legally in their country of origin, but also would be recognized as operating legally here in the UK. So I don't know, Marcus, if you had any views on a medicinal company operating overseas looking to list in the UK. What type of items would you be looking for, or the FCA be looking for, to show that medicinal equivalence here? We surmised it might be along legal opinions, but I'd be grateful to hear what you think.
So I think, Dylan, possibly before we just sort of go on to that aspect, I think it's probably worth just sort of looking at AIM as well. It's I often say this, but it's worth bearing in mind that